Trauma is one of the most misunderstood topics of our time. It is either misused to describe a stressful experience, or it is seen as something that only occurs in extreme cases, sometimes being confused with events themselves. But trauma is not the event. It is not something that happens to you. Assault, neglect, or near-death experiences are traumatic, but are not the trauma itself. Trauma is the internal experience of the event. As such, each person's trauma is deeply personal and unique to them, even if the traumatic event was shared by many people. Take the case of Stan and Ute, who in September 1999 were caught in one of the worst road disasters in Canadian history. They were trapped in the same car, experienced the same paralyzing fear of death, yet the impact it had on them was very different. Stan was experiencing flashbacks of the event and was repeatedly overwhelmed by panic and fear. Ute, however, reported feeling numb. As psychiatrist Bessel Kolk explains, their subjective experiences were reflected in a change in their brains. Stan's alarm circuitry had gone into overdrive, making him feel like he was in constant danger. Ute's brain scans, in contrast, showed decreased activity in the areas in the brain responsible for sensing the body. In order to try to protect Stan, his brain was alerting him of the extreme danger he was in, while Ute's brain had shut down her self-sensing system to shield her from the overwhelming nature of the experience. Both of these responses are meant to help in the short term, but as the experience had imprinted itself so strongly on both Stan and Ute, they were unable to let go of their survival mechanisms. That is another hallmark of trauma, the past acting as a blanket thrown over the present, clouding the moment and barring our access to what is right in front of us. This can, for example, be in the form of repeated flashbacks to a specific event, or in the form of implicit memories. Implicit memory describes when something in the present triggers an unconscious memory, so that we react in the present to something in our personal past, rather than to the thing that actually happened in the present. However, trauma does not only come from such experiences as those of Stan and Ute. In his book The Myth of Normal, Gabor Maté highlights two distinctions which are critical for our understanding of trauma. Firstly, there is the distinction between what I'll call the traumatic event and the traumatic non-event. The traumatic event is a thing that happened that should not have happened, like a natural disaster, assault, violence, etc. The traumatic non-event, however, is when something that should have happened did not happen, like in the cases of neglect or abandonment, where love disappears. The second distinction is between trauma with a capital T and with a small t. Capital T trauma refers to what most people think of when they hear the word trauma: abuse, neglect, etc. Small t trauma, however, signifies the kind of trauma that can be described as death by 1,000 cuts. It is the countless small but painful experiences that we carry with us throughout our lives. It can, for example, be an accumulation of hurtful comments that still lingers with us, even years later. But you might ask, what distinguishes small t trauma from a mildly stressful experience? Well, the answer lies in the individual's ability to integrate the experience into their lives. For example, if someone says something hurtful to a child, but the adults in the child's life are emotionally unavailable to help the child work through the experience, the child is likely to push their feelings down in an attempt to cope with them. Because the child doesn't work through his feelings, the experience is left like a wound on his soul. This wound may be little more than a cut, but if there are many enough, then any given person would eventually bleed to death. In addition, people will respond differently to different experiences. Temperament, which is largely believed to be inborn, can greatly affect how we perceive any given experience. For example, someone who is more sensitive is inherently going to react stronger to any experience compared with someone who is less sensitive. Furthermore, the neurocircuitry responsible for our capacity for emotional self-regulation develops in response to parent-child interactions. Meaning, if the parent is emotionally attuned to the child and able to meet his emotional needs, then the child is likely to grow up to be self-reliant, independent, and will take on any challenge in stride. Whereas if the parent is unable to meet the child's emotional needs, due to, for example, chronic stress resulting from economic pressures, then the child will grow up to be anxious and easily overwhelmed by even everyday challenges. To summarize, trauma is not a box that you either fit into or fall outside of. It is a complex spectrum of experiences that shape how we see ourselves and the world around us. If we want to heal from trauma, we have to start by recognizing the impact those experiences had on us, because it is the magnitude of the impact of the experience, rather than of the event itself, that defines trauma. One way to start doing this is through a technique called compassionate curiosity directed at oneself. It means to treat yourself like a friend who comes to you and explains their problems to you. You then ask that friend, which is yourself, questions to try to understand why you are struggling the way you are. You then try to give yourself the compassion and understanding that you would give your best friend, so that you may receive the compassion you crave and permit yourself to truly feel what you are feeling. In this process of asking yourself questions, you may even need to recognize how your own parents' imperfections have affected you throughout your life without blaming or assigning guilt to them. They probably did their best, but they were flawed people just like you, and it is okay to accept the pain they caused you without diminishing the love that they have for you. Another crucial step in healing from trauma is connecting with your body. As was the case for Yute, many people disconnect from their body in an attempt to cope with something that overwhelms them. Yute's example is on the more extreme end of the spectrum, but disconnecting from the body can take many forms. The most common would be disconnecting from our gut feelings, which communicate our implicit knowledge to our conscious minds. There are several possible ways to approach reconnecting with one's body. Yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, or even martial arts can all serve to help you be more attuned to your body, as they all involve moving in space with intentionality. This requires you to be attentive to your body as you move, honing your capacity for self-awareness. In fact, van der Kolk and his team conducted an experiment where they had a group of traumatized women enter a yoga class regularly. After a short time, there was an observable changes in these women's brains. A heightening of activity in areas responsible for self-regulation. Practices of meditation and mindfulness produced similar responses. Yet for all of this, one of the most important steps in healing is acceptance. Acceptance of your pain, your failures, your past, your imperfections, and your limitations. But to accept does not mean to resign yourself to your current condition. Daring to act in spite of your struggles, daring to live, is what it really means to be alive. See, I personally believe that life is not a state of being, not a form of existence. I believe life to be an act of creation, of self-creation, something that needs to be acted out in each moment of our existence. But this should not be confused with self-realization. Self-creation does not need to be anything grand. It can take the form of something so simple as going for walks every day in your local forest or park. Practicing moving in space, and maybe even smiling at some strangers, can be a powerful source of transformation. At least that is what it was for me. By acting in the world, you are taking an active role in forming your relationship with that world. By moving in the world, you're telling yourself that the world is a place that you want to inhabit. By smiling at strangers, you're telling yourself that the world is a good place filled with good people who make you smile. Over time, these statements may even come true. At least they did for me. Ultimately, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to trauma, as each person's trauma is unique to that person. The approach which works best has to be discovered by every individual. Nevertheless, I do hope this video has been helpful in one way or another. You're welcome to share your personal stories in the comments below, and if you want to look deeper into the topic of trauma, I can recommend the books by Gabor Maté and Bessel van der Kolk, which this video is based on. I'll also include some links to interviews and lectures they have conducted in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to promote this video and channel so more people can join in on this conversation. This is all I have for you today, however, so make sure you take care of yourself, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.